The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched before Ambassador Sarah Chun like a coliseum of judgment. Crystalline walls rose in perfect spirals, reflecting the bioluminescent displays of 1,000 different species. The air hummed with translation matrices, converting thoughts and sounds into universal meaning. Yet despite all this technological marvel, Sarah felt the weight of primitive hostility pressing down on her shoulders. She stood alone at the speaker's podium, a small human figure dwarfed by the massive assembly. Above her, tier upon tier of alien delegates looked down with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to open contempt. The Zephyrian representatives clicked their chitinous mandibles in what she had learned was their equivalent of laughter. The towering Kroleks shifted their massive bulk, causing their seats to groan under gravitational stress fields. The floor recognizes the representative of the human species, announced Council Prime Vextar, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension reserved for particularly slow children. The Altarian's 4 arms gestured dismissively as holographic displays showed Earth's location in what the Council termed the Outer Rim territories. To them, humanity's home was little more than a backwater world circling an unremarkable yellow star. Sarah activated her neural implant, feeling the familiar tingle as her thoughts synchronized with the translation matrix. She had practiced this speech for months, knowing that every word would be scrutinized, analyzed, and likely dismissed. The fate of humanity's application for council membership rested on the next few minutes. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the acoustic perfection of the chamber. "I stand before you today to present humanity's formal request for admission to the Galactic Council. We come not as conquerors or supplicants, but as a species ready to contribute to the greater galactic community." A wave of clicking, chittering, and harmonic humming swept through the assembly. The translation matrix fed her the emotional content of the responses, amusement, skepticism, and something that tasted like pity in her mind. Council Prime Vextar raised one of his primary arms, and the chamber fell silent. "Ambassador Chun, the Council appreciates your enthusiasm. However, we must address certain concerns regarding your species' suitability for membership." His secondary arms manipulated holographic controls, and massive displays materialized throughout the chamber. The first image showed human soldiers in combat, their primitive kinetic weapons flashing in Earth's sunlight. "Your species has a documented history of internecine warfare spanning your entire recorded history. Even now, as you seek to join us, conflicts rage across your homeworld." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Vextar continued without pause. "Furthermore, your technological development follows concerning patterns." The display shifted to show human industrial centers, the smoky output of factories and power plants. "Your energy production relies heavily on combustion of fossil materials. Your transportation systems are inefficient and polluting. Your information networks are primitive by galactic standards." Delegate Zarthon of the hegemony leaned forward, her serpentine form coiling as she spoke. "The human representative fails to understand the sophistication required for council membership. We have observed your species for centuries, watching as you struggle with concepts our youngest offspring master instinctively." The chamber erupted in what the translation matrix identified as various forms of alien laughter. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. She had expected this. "If I may respond," she said, waiting for the noise to subside. "Every species represented here once faced similar challenges. The Altarians fought continent-spanning wars before achieving unity. The Zephyrians nearly destroyed their homeworld with industrial pollution before developing clean energy. The Kroleks, enough!" roared Delegate Mordok, the massive Krolex's voice causing harmonic vibrations in the chamber's structure. "Do not compare your primitive struggles to our glorious histories. We evolved beyond such limitations through superior intellect and natural selection. Humanity clings to barbarism." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides, but she maintained diplomatic composure. "We acknowledge our challenges, but we've also shown remarkable progress. In just the last century, we've eliminated several diseases, begun reversing environmental damage, and taken our first steps into space. We've established colonies on 3 worlds and developed faster-than-light communication. Colonies built with borrowed technology," interjected Delegate Thrix of the Syndicate, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns that conveyed disdain. "Ships designed from reverse-engineered council vessels that crashed on your world. Even your presence here today depends on technology you did not create." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah felt the weight of truth in it. Humanity had indeed learned much from studying alien technology found in ancient crash sites. But they had also improved upon it, adapted it, made it uniquely human. We have taken inspiration from Council technology and advanced it, she admitted. But innovation has always been humanity's strength. We see solutions where others see problems. We adapt where others break. Pretty words, said Vextar, his tone suggesting he found them anything but. But the Council requires more than adaptation. We require species capable of contributing meaningfully to galactic civilization. What can humanity offer that we do not already possess in abundance? Sarah had prepared for this question, but standing in this vast chamber filled with beings whose civilizations span millennia, her prepared answers felt inadequate. She thought of Earth, of the billions of humans looking to the stars with hope and wonder. She thought of human artists, scientists, dreamers, and fighters. We offer perspective, she said finally. We offer the viewpoint of a young species still close enough to its origins to remember what it means to struggle, to fail, and to rise again. We offer creativity born from necessity and determination forged in adversity. The silence that followed felt different from the previous pauses. For a moment, Sarah thought she might have reached them. Then, Delegate Kethrak of the Dominion spoke, their voice carrying the authority of eons. The Council has existed for over 50,000 years, they said, their energy-based form pulsing with ancient light. In that time, we have admitted 733 species to membership. Each underwent rigorous evaluation. Each proved their worth through demonstrated superiority in at least one significant field: technology, philosophy, military might, or resource management. The displays around the chamber shifted again, showing the achievements of various Council species. Massive space constructs that dwarfed Earth's moon, energy matrices that could power entire star systems, philosophical texts that had guided galactic thought for millennia. Humanity, Kethrak continued, excels at nothing save reproduction and consumption. Your mathematics are adequate, but not exceptional. Your physics understanding lags behind galactic standards by centuries. Your philosophy is crude, your art primitive, your military capabilities laughable by Council standards. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, a combination of anger and despair that she fought to keep from her expression. Around her, the alien delegates murmured agreement, their voices creating a symphony of dismissal. The Council's decision is unanimous, announced Vextar, his forearms spreading in a gesture of finality. Humanity's application for membership is denied. You may reapply in 500 standard years, assuming your species has achieved meaningful advancement by then. The gavel fell, an ancient tradition maintained even in this age of quantum legislation, and Sarah felt the sound echo in her bones. 500 years. Longer than recorded human history. Longer than most human civilizations had existed. However, Vextar continued, and something in his tone made Sarah's skin crawl. The Council is not without mercy. We understand that rejection can be difficult for primitive species to accept. Therefore, we extend an offer of protectorate status. The chamber fell completely silent. Sarah knew what protectorate status meant. She had studied the histories of other rejected species. It meant surrender. It meant accepting Council oversight of human development, Council limitations on human expansion, Council control over human destiny. Under protectorate status, Vextar explained, humanity would receive the protection and guidance of the Council. Your technological development would be monitored and directed along approved paths. Your expansion into space would be limited to designated sectors. Your military capabilities would be restricted to internal peacekeeping forces. In exchange, added Delegate Zarthon, humanity would have access to certain Council technologies suitable for your developmental level. Medical advances to extend your brief lifespans, agricultural improvements to feed your growing population, energy systems to replace your primitive fossil fuel dependence. Sarah stared at the assembled delegates, reading the expressions she could interpret and relying on the translation matrix for the rest. They expected her to accept. They expected humanity to roll over and accept this gilded cage in exchange for technological scraps. She began, then stopped. The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. Every instinct screamed at her to reject their offer, to tell them exactly what humanity thought of their condescending charity. But she also thought of Earth, of 7 billion people whose future hung on her next words. I need to consult with my government. she said finally. Of course, Vextar replied, his tone suggesting he found her hesitation amusing. Take all the time you need. The council is patient. The offer will remain open for, shall we say, 1 standard year? Surely sufficient time for your leaders to recognize the wisdom of acceptance. Sarah nodded stiffly and turned from the podium. As she walked toward the chamber's exit, she heard the conversations beginning behind her, alien voices discussing her species like scientists debating the fate of a failed experiment. The translation matrix fed her fragments of their words. Predictable response, inevitable outcome. Perhaps extinction would be kinder. The corridor beyond the chamber stretched before her, its crystalline walls reflecting her image into infinity. She walked between the reflections of herself, a small human woman in a simple blue dress, carrying the weight of her species' future on shoulders that suddenly felt far too narrow. Her escort, a minor Altarian functionary named Veltar, materialized beside her with the silent grace common to his species. The transport to your quarters has been prepared, Ambassador, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Thank you, Sarah replied, not trusting herself to say more. They walked in silence through corridors that showcased the might of galactic civilization. Gravity fields allowed beings of different physiologies to move comfortably in the same spaces. Environmental controls maintained perfect atmospheric conditions for dozens of species simultaneously. Art installations from across the galaxy demonstrated beauty beyond human comprehension. It was magnificent. It was everything humanity aspired to join. And it had just rejected them as primitive children. In her quarters, a space designed to accommodate human physiology with almost insulting precision, Sarah activated her quantum communicator. The device hummed to life, establishing a connection across the vast distance to Earth. After several minutes, the face of President Martinez appeared on the holographic display. Sarah, he said, and she could see the hope and fear warring in his expression. How did it go? She told him everything. The mockery, the dismissal, the offer of protectorate status. As she spoke, she watched the president's face cycle through emotions, disappointment, anger, resignation, and, finally, something that looked like determination. So they want us to become their pets, he said when she finished. Essentially, yes. They'll give us enough technology to keep us docile and dependent, but never enough to truly advance. We'll be a curiosity, a reminder of what primitive species look like before they're properly civilized. President Martinez leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. In the background, Sarah could see the familiar blue marble of Earth through the window of his office. Home, the world they were all fighting for. What's your recommendation, Ambassador? Sarah had been dreading this question, but she knew her answer. I recommend we reject their offer, even knowing what that might mean for humanity. Especially knowing what it means. Sarah stood straighter, feeling something crystallize in her chest. Mr. President, they didn't reject us because we're too primitive. They rejected us because we scare them. Scare them? Sarah, these beings have technology we can barely comprehend. Their youngest civilizations are older than our recorded history. And that's exactly why we scare them, Sarah replied. Think about it. We went from horse-drawn carriages to space flight in less than a century. We developed nuclear weapons and nuclear power within decades of discovering the atom. We've taken their abandoned technology and improved upon it in ways they never imagined. She began pacing, energy building in her voice. They've been stagnant for millennia, Mr. President. They've achieved perfection in their own minds, and perfection has made them complacent. We're not perfect. We're hungry, desperate, chaotic, and unpredictable. We represent everything they've evolved beyond, and deep down, they know that makes us dangerous. So what do you propose we do? Sarah stopped pacing and faced the communicator directly. We go home. We tell them no. And then we show them exactly what humanity can accomplish when we're properly motivated. President Martinez was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decision. The council expects an answer. 1 standard year. Then, we'd better get to work. After the communication ended, Sarah stood alone in her quarters, looking out at the vast space station that housed the Galactic Council. Ships from 1,000 worlds moved in carefully orchestrated patterns around the structure, their alien designs beautiful and strange. Somewhere among them was the transport that would take her home to Earth, to a world that suddenly seemed very small and very isolated. But, as she watched the alien ships, Sarah found herself smiling for the first time since entering the council chamber. The delegates thought they knew humanity. They thought they understood the species that painted on cave walls and reached for the stars. They thought 500 years was a reasonable time frame for primitive minds to achieve meaningful advancement. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The transport journey back to Earth took 18 days. 18 days during which Sarah composed her final report to the United Earth government. She wrote about council technology, about their social structures, about their strengths and weaknesses. Most importantly, she wrote about their arrogance. When she finally saw Earth growing larger in the viewport, that small blue world that had been dismissed as insignificant, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. The council had mocked humanity. They had offered chains disguised as gifts. They expected submission. They were about to discover what happened when you cornered a species that had clawed its way up from the primordial soup, not through evolution's gentle guidance, but through sheer bloody-minded determination to survive and thrive. Humanity was going home, and they were going to get to work. 57 years after Ambassador Sarah Chun returned from the council chamber, the universe began to notice that something had changed about humanity. The change came not with fanfare or declaration, but with a silence that gradually grew too loud to ignore. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of Titan Station, watching the construction of what would become the largest artificial structure in human space. The skeleton of metal and energy fields stretched for hundreds of kilometers, its framework housing technologies that would have seemed like magic to the humans who first set foot on Luna generations earlier. Around her, holographic displays showed the progress of similar projects throughout human territory. 67 star systems now claimed the human flag, each one humming with activity that defied every projection the Council had made about human development. The latest reports from the border systems, said Admiral Chun, Sarah's granddaughter, carrying forward a family tradition of serving humanity's larger purpose. She handed Elena a quantum data pad, its surface shifting to accommodate Elena's preferred display format. Elena scanned the information, her enhanced neural implants processing data streams that would have overwhelmed unaugmented human consciousness. The Zephyrian mining fleet turned back again. Third time this month. Same pattern as the others. They approach the system boundary, detect our monitoring stations, and retreat without explanation. Admiral Chin's expression carried a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Our intelligence suggests they're reporting the encounters as anomalous readings rather than acknowledging our technology. Elena nodded, unsurprised. The Council species had grown comfortable in their assumption of technological superiority. Encountering human systems that matched or exceeded their capabilities didn't fit their worldview, so they simply refused to see what their instruments clearly recorded. What about the Altarian survey mission to the Proxima cluster? Cancelled. Official reason given was scheduling conflicts, but our sources in Council space suggest they detected the quantum resonance signatures from our industrial operations. They can't explain technology that shouldn't exist. Through the observation deck's transparent aluminum walls, Elena watched human workers moving between the construction framework. Many were baseline humans, their movements guided by powered exoskeletons that amplified strength and precision. Others had chosen various enhancement packages, neural upgrades for improved processing, genetic modifications for extended lifespan, cybernetic implants for direct interface with quantum systems. The diversity would have horrified the Council purists, who believed in the sanctity of original biological forms. Humanity had embraced change as enthusiastically as they had once embraced conflict, transforming themselves as readily as they transformed their environment. Dr. Vasquez, came a voice from behind them. Elena turned to see Director James Park approaching, his silver hair and lined face marking him as one of the few humans who chose to age naturally rather than submit to life extension treatments. The prototype testing is ready for your observation. Elena followed Park to the station's central laboratory complex, where Project Prometheus had taken shape over the past decade. The laboratory itself was a marvel of human engineering. Force fields contained experiments that manipulated fundamental forces. Quantum computers calculated solutions to problems that had puzzled galactic civilization for millennia. And in the center of it all sat a device no larger than a human torso that hummed with barely contained energy. Fusion isn't enough anymore, Park explained as they approached the prototype. Even our improved fusion systems pale compared to what the Council species achieved thousands of years ago. But they stopped innovating when they achieved perfection. We kept pushing. The device before them looked deceptively simple, curved metal surfaces that seemed to bend light around them, crystalline matrices that pulsed with inner fire, and connections made from materials that existed only in the quantum foam between real and imaginary space. Elena's enhanced senses could detect the massive energies contained within, forces that made stellar cores seem like campfires. 0-point energy extraction, Park continued. We're literally mining the vacuum itself for power. The Kroleks consider vacuum energy extraction to be impossible. They proved it mathematically 15,000 years ago. Their equations were correct, but they stopped thinking about the problem. We kept trying anyway. Elena approached the device carefully, her neural implants analyzing the energy patterns they detected. Output. This prototype generates approximately 10 times the energy of our most advanced fusion reactors. The production models will be significantly more efficient. Park's expression carried the quiet pride of someone who had helped prove the impossible was merely difficult. We'll have the first production units online within 6 months. As they spoke, technicians throughout the laboratory continued their work on dozens of other projects. Elena recognized several improved faster-than-light communication systems that would make Council quantum networks seem sluggish, material science breakthroughs that produced substances stronger than anything in known space, and weapons technologies that human military doctrine demanded but human ethics carefully constrained. The Council monitoring stations, Elena asked, are they detecting any of this? Park shook his head. We learned our lesson from their first assessment. Everything sensitive happens behind quantum barriers they can't penetrate. As far as their instruments are concerned, we're still burning fossil fuels and shooting chemical rockets at each other. The deception had been Admiral Sarah Chen's final strategic recommendation before her death 2 decades earlier. Let the Council believe what they wanted to believe. Let them assume humanity remained primitive and predictable. Let them grow comfortable in their superiority while humanity advanced in directions they couldn't imagine. Elena left the laboratory with her mind racing. The prototype she had just seen represented a fundamental shift in human capabilities, but it was only one piece of a larger puzzle. Throughout human space, similar breakthroughs were occurring with increasing frequency. Biotechnology that could rebuild human physiology from the cellular level up, artificial intelligence that enhanced rather than replaced human consciousness, transportation systems that manipulated space-time itself. Each advance built upon the others, creating a cascade of innovation that accelerated with each passing year. Where the Council species had achieved stability through perfection, humanity had achieved growth through controlled chaos. Her next stop was the communications center, where a message waited that would change everything. The quantum encryption marked it as coming from deep in Council space, from one of the monitoring stations they believed humanity couldn't detect. Admiral Chen asked me to wait for you before opening this, said Communications Officer Torres, gesturing toward the encrypted message displayed on her screens. Elena nodded and activated her authorization codes. The message decrypted to reveal text in perfect Council standard, but the source identifier made her blood run cold. It was from Delegate Vextar himself, the Altarian who had humiliated Ambassador Sarah Chen decades earlier. To the human leadership, the message began, its tone formal but carrying undertones of something Elena couldn't quite identify. The Galactic Council notes that the deadline for humanity's response to our protectorate offer approaches. We extend this final reminder that acceptance would benefit both our species and yours. The alternative to Council protection is isolation in a galaxy that grows more dangerous each day. Elena read the rest of the message, her enhanced comprehension parsing the diplomatic language for its true meaning. The Council was growing impatient. More concerning, they were growing nervous about something. References to unstable regions of space and emerging threats to galactic stability suggested problems Elena hadn't heard about through standard channels. Get me Admiral Chen, she told Torres. Priority Alpha. Within minutes, Admiral Chen's image appeared on the holographic display, her expression immediately alert as she registered Elena's urgency. What's happened? Message from Vextar. They're pushing harder for an answer about the protectorate status. Elena transmitted the message content. But there's something else. References to threats they're dealing with. I think they might need us more than they're letting on. Admiral Chen studied the message, her expression growing thoughtful. Our intelligence sources have reported increased military activity in several Council sectors. Ships being recalled from frontier regions, defensive positions being reinforced around core worlds. Any idea what they're defending against? Nothing confirmed. But there have been reports of unknown vessels in the outer galaxy. Ships using technology that doesn't match any known Council species. Admiral Chin's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone discussing classified information. Whatever it is, the Council is taking it seriously enough to quietly mobilize resources. Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align. The Council's arrogance hadn't diminished over the decades. Their monitoring stations still treated human space as a curiosity rather than a potential threat. But something had them worried enough to press for human submission despite their contempt for human capabilities. They want us contained, she realized. Whatever this threat is, they don't want variables like humanity running loose while they deal with it. That would be my assessment, Admiral Chin agreed. Which raises the question of how we respond to their ultimatum. Elena thought about the prototype she had just witnessed, about the industrial capacity growing throughout human space, about the technologies that were advancing beyond even optimistic projections. Humanity had spent 60 years building in secret, advancing in silence, growing strong behind a mask of apparent primitiveness. What's the status of Project Lighthouse? She asked. Admiral Chin's expression shifted to something Elena had learned to associate with good news delivered carefully. Ahead of schedule, the first beacon network went operational last week. We now have instantaneous communication between all human systems, using quantum entanglement methods the Council believes are impossible. And Project Doorway? The prototype tests exceeded all expectations. We can now move ships between any 2 points in human space without using traditional faster-than-light drives. Travel time between Earth and our farthest colonies has been reduced from months to hours. Elena nodded slowly. Each of these advances represented capabilities that would revolutionize galactic civilization, but humanity had developed them in isolation, without Council guidance or oversight. They had taken the fragments of abandoned Council technology found decades earlier and evolved them in directions the Council had never imagined. Admiral, I think it's time we gave the Council their answer. Admiral Chin's smile carried the same quiet confidence Elena remembered from her grandmother's historical recordings. My thoughts exactly. I'll prepare the message for transmission. The message that went out to the Council 3 days later was brief, formal, and devastating in its simplicity. Transmitted on frequencies the Council believed humans couldn't access, using encryption methods that shouldn't have existed in human space. It carried just 37 words. The United Earth government formally declines the Galactic Council's offer of protectorate status. Humanity chooses to pursue its own path among the stars. We wish the Council well in their future endeavors. Elena was present in the communications center when they transmitted the response, watching as the quantum signal propagated instantaneously across interstellar distances through humanity's hidden beacon network. The message would reach the Council chambers in moments, carrying with it the collective voice of a species that had been underestimated for the last time. Think they'll take it well? Asked Torres, her tone carrying the dry humor that had become characteristic of humanity's military forces. I suspect they'll be surprised, Elena replied, watching the signal telemetry confirm successful transmission. They've spent so long believing their own assumptions about us that they've forgotten how to adapt to new information. In the hours that followed, human monitoring stations throughout the galaxy detected the sudden surge in Council communications traffic. Emergency frequencies activated for the first time in centuries, military vessels changed course toward human space, and priority signals flashed between Council worlds with an urgency that suggested panic rather than anger. The Council had expected submission or ignorant defiance. They had prepared for the response of a primitive species that didn't understand the consequences of rejection. Instead, they received a message that demonstrated technological capabilities they couldn't explain, transmitted through methods they couldn't duplicate, from a species they had dismissed as irrelevant. Elena stood on the observation deck of Titan Station, watching the continued construction of humanity's largest project, and found herself smiling. In the distance, she could see the first of the new quantum gates taking shape, massive structures that would allow instant travel to any point in the galaxy, not just within human space. The Council had mocked humanity's primitive struggles, offered them chains disguised as gifts, and expected grateful submission. Instead, humanity had spent 60 years building something the Council couldn't understand or predict. The silence had been broken. Now it was time to see how the galaxy would respond to what humanity had become. The Council chambers had never known silence like this. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Great Assembly sat in complete stillness as delegates struggled to process information that challenged every assumption they had held about the natural order of civilization. Council Prime Vextar stood at the central podium, his forearms moving nervously as holographic displays showed data that his mind refused to accept. Around him, representatives of 733 species maintained the quiet of beings confronted with the impossible made manifest. "The quantum analysis is conclusive," he announced, his voice carrying none of its usual arrogant certainty. "The human response was transmitted using technology that does not exist in our databases. The encryption methods are unknown to Council science." Delegate Kethrak pulsed with energy patterns that expressed deep confusion. "Unknown is insufficient. The transmission method itself appears to violate established principles of quantum mechanics. Our physicists report that the signal propagated instantaneously across galactic distances without using any recognized form of faster-than-light communication." In the 68 years since humanity's rejection by the Council, this was the first time human technology had been openly acknowledged as beyond Council understanding. The admission hung in the chamber's atmosphere like a toxic cloud, poisoning assumptions that had guided galactic policy for millennia. "Perhaps more concerning," added Delegate Mordoke, the massive Krolex's voice causing structural vibrations, "is what our reconnaissance vessels have discovered in human space. The primitive colonies we observed decades ago have been replaced by industrial complexes of unprecedented scale. Energy signatures suggest technologies that our models indicate should be impossible." The displays around the chamber shifted to show long-range sensor data from the edges of human space. Where Council maps showed a handful of crude settlements barely capable of sustaining themselves, the new readings revealed a thriving civilization that spanned dozens of star systems. Massive structures orbited every inhabited world, energy levels peaked beyond anything in Council space, and ship movements followed patterns that suggested transportation methods the Council couldn't identify. "How long?" asked Delegate Thrix, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns of barely controlled panic. "How long have they been concealing their true capabilities?" Vextar consulted his displays, his expression growing more troubled with each data point. "Analysis suggests the deception began immediately following their initial rejection. Every monitoring station we established to observe human development has been systematically fed false information for nearly 7 decades. The implications rippled through the chamber like seismic shocks. The Council's superiority had been built on the assumption that they could observe and predict the development of lesser species. If humanity had been successfully deceiving them for generations, what did that say about Council surveillance of other civilizations? The Zephyrian hegemony reports that 3 of their mining fleets have encountered human vessels using propulsion systems that appear to manipulate space-time directly. Continued Vextar, reading from reports that continued to arrive with each passing hour. The humans made no aggressive moves, but our ship's instruments could not explain what they observed. Delegate Zarthon coiled her serpentine form in obvious distress. The implications extend beyond technology. If humanity has achieved these advances in isolation, without Council guidance, it suggests. She paused, unwilling to voice the thought that challenged the fundamental basis of galactic civilization. It suggests they never needed our guidance, finished Delegate Thrix, their harmonic voice carrying frequencies of realization and fear. It suggests that our rejection of their membership application was not an act of wisdom, but of blindness. The chamber erupted in cacophony as delegates voiced their shock in 100 different forms of communication. Some species clicked mandibles in denial, others pulsed with bioluminescent patterns of confusion, and a few simply sat in stunned silence as their worldviews crumbled around them. Council Prime Vextar raised all 4 arms, calling for order that took long minutes to achieve. When the chamber finally quieted, his next words carried the weight of civilizations. "The immediate question before us is not how this happened, but what it means for galactic stability. We are dealing with a species whose capabilities we cannot assess, whose intentions we cannot predict, and whose response to our authority we cannot guarantee." As if summoned by his words, alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. Emergency frequencies activated for the first time in living memory, their harmonic patterns causing several species to instinctively prepare for combat. Vextar's displays immediately shifted to show incoming transmissions marked with the highest priority classifications. "What is it?" demanded Mordoke, his gravitational field fluctuating with stress. "Unknown vessels," Vextar replied, his voice tight with something the Council had not felt in centuries: fear. "Massive formations approaching our outer perimeter from the galactic rim. Technology signatures match nothing in our databases." The displays showed long-range sensor readings of ships that defied easy categorization. Massive structures that seemed to blend organic curves with geometric precision, propulsion systems that left no detectable energy signatures, and formations that moved with the coordinated precision of a species that had evolved warfare into an art form. "The threat we've been tracking for months," whispered Delegate Kethrak, their energy patterns flickering with recognition. They finally revealed themselves in force. For 3 months, Council border systems had reported strange encounters. Ships that appeared without warning, scanned defensive installations with instruments that pierced every known form of shielding, and vanished before any response could be mounted. The incidents had been classified at the highest levels, discussed only in emergency sessions attended by the most senior delegates. Now the unknown threat was no longer hiding. Hundreds of vessels approached Council space in a formation that spoke of conquest rather than exploration. "Estimated time to contact with our outer defensive lines?" asked Vextar. 17 hours, came the response from the Council's military command. "All frontier fleets are being recalled to defensive positions around core worlds." As the chamber digested this information, a new communication signal appeared on Vextar's displays. This one carrying encryption signatures that were becoming disturbingly familiar. The transmission was from human space, originating from the system they called Sol. "Another message from humanity," Vextar announced, his tone suggesting he dreaded reading it as much as the assembly feared hearing it. The message appeared on displays throughout the chamber, its text simple and direct. "To the Galactic Council, we have become aware of the approaching threat to galactic stability. Despite our recent disagreements, humanity offers its assistance in defending civilization. Our representatives will arrive at Council space within 6 hours to coordinate defensive efforts. We suggest you prepare for discussions regarding revised diplomatic relationships." The silence that followed was deeper than the vacuum between stars. 6 hours. It would take Council vessels weeks to cross the distance from human space to the Council chambers, even using their most advanced faster-than-light drives. If humanity could arrive in 6 hours, it meant their transportation technology was generations beyond anything the Council possessed. "They're coming here," said Delegate Zarthon, her voice carrying overtones of awe and terror. "They're coming to help us. Or to watch us fall," added Mordoke grimly. "We rejected them. We offered them chains. Why would they help us now?" The question hung unanswered as the Council prepared for humanity's arrival. Emergency sessions convened to discuss unprecedented diplomatic protocols. Military advisors struggled to integrate unknown human capabilities into defensive plans. Scientists worked frantically to understand technologies that violated their understanding of physical law. 6 hours later, every sensor in Council space detected the impossible. Ships appeared in the space around the Council station without any warning, materializing from what seemed to be empty vacuum. The vessels themselves were beautiful in a way that merged human engineering aesthetics with technologies that bent reality around them. Smooth curves and crystalline matrices suggested ships that had been grown rather than built, their hulls seeming to phase in and out of visible spectrum as they moved. The lead vessel was smaller than the massive Council dreadnoughts, but sensor readings suggested armor that could withstand stellar cores and weapons that manipulated fundamental forces. As the human fleet took defensive positions around the Council station, their formations demonstrated coordination that spoke of shared consciousness and tactical thinking beyond anything in Council doctrine. Ambassador Elena Vasquez materialized in the Council chamber without ceremony, her transport technology depositing her directly into the chamber despite every security system the Council possessed. She appeared alone, wearing simple diplomatic attire that somehow made her more imposing than if she had arrived in battle armor. "Honored delegates," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez, representing the United Earth government. We understand you have a problem." The irony was lost on no one present. 70 years earlier, a human ambassador had stood in this same chamber as a supplicant, begging for acceptance into galactic civilization. Now a human ambassador stood before them as an equal, offering aid to the very beings who had rejected her species as primitive. "Ambassador," Vextar managed, his diplomatic training struggling to adapt to circumstances no manual had prepared him for. "Your arrival was unexpected, as was yours 70 years ago," Elena replied calmly. "But circumstances change. The galaxy faces a threat that transcends our previous disagreements." She gestured, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber, showing detailed sensor readings of the approaching fleet. The information was far more precise than anything Council instruments had achieved, revealing ship designs and technology patterns that suggested an entirely unknown species. They call themselves the Devourers, Elena continued. We've been tracking them for 18 months as they consumed worlds along the galactic rim. Their technology is based on principles we're still studying, but their intentions are clear. They convert matter directly into energy, leaving nothing behind but empty space. The displays showed the aftermath of Devourer attacks, star systems where planets had simply vanished, leaving behind gravitational anomalies where worlds once orbited. Entire civilizations had been erased so completely that only their absence remained as evidence they had ever existed. How many worlds? Asked Delegate Kethrak, their energy patterns dim with shock. 47 systems confirmed destroyed, Elena replied. Probably more that we haven't discovered yet. At their current rate of advance, they'll reach the first Council worlds within 72 hours. The mathematical reality of extinction settled over the chamber like a burial shroud. The Council's defensive fleets, designed to maintain order among member species rather than fight galactic wars, would be overwhelmed by an enemy that consumed matter itself. What do you propose? Vextar asked, his voice carrying the desperate hope of the drowning. Joint defense, Elena said simply. Human fleets are already positioning themselves along likely attack vectors. Our technology allows for tactical advantages your forces could exploit. But we need coordination, and we need it immediately. The Council delegates exchanged glances across species lines, communication passing between them through channels Elena couldn't intercept. The discussion was brief. When facing extinction, pride became a luxury no one could afford. What are your terms? Vextar asked finally. Elena's smile carried echoes of her predecessor's determination. No terms, no conditions, no requirements for gratitude or future consideration. The galaxy is worth defending regardless of politics. The simplicity of the offer struck the chamber like a physical blow. Humanity was offering unconditional assistance to the very beings who had humiliated them, demanding nothing in return but the chance to preserve civilization itself. However, Elena continued, her tone shifting slightly. After we deal with this threat, I believe we should discuss humanity's status within galactic civilization. Recent events have demonstrated that our species has developed beyond your previous assessments. The understatement was so profound it bordered on comedy. Around the chamber, delegates struggled with the cognitive dissonance of seeing humanity as both the primitive species they had rejected and the advanced civilization offering salvation. Agreed, Vextar said, speaking for the Council with an authority that transcended normal procedures. Full cooperation against the Devourers, followed by immediate review of humanity's diplomatic status. Elena nodded and activated devices that materialized from apparently empty space around her. Then, let's get to work. My technical advisors will begin uploading tactical data to your systems. I recommend you prepare your fleets for technologies they've never encountered. As human data flowed into Council networks, the assembled delegates began to understand the true scope of humanity's advancement. Weapons that could disrupt matter at the quantum level, shields that existed in folded space-time, propulsion systems that treated physical law as guidelines rather than limitations. The species that had been rejected for primitiveness now possessed technologies that made Council science seem archaic. In the hours that followed, the greatest fleet in galactic history assembled around strategic points throughout Council space. Human vessels moved through formations of Council ships, their alien technologies interfacing seamlessly with systems that had seemed incompatible moments before. Tactical displays showed defensive patterns that utilized the strengths of both civilizations while compensating for their respective limitations. When the Devourers arrived, they found something they had not encountered in their consumption of 47 star systems, resistance that adapted faster than they could overcome it. The battle lasted 3 days and reshaped the political structure of the galaxy forever. Human weapons proved capable of disrupting the Devourer matter conversion systems, while Council defensive technologies protected human vessels from counterattacks that should have been devastating. The combined fleet fought with coordination that transcended species differences, united by the knowledge that failure meant the end of everything they had built. When the last Devourer vessel was destroyed, its wreckage dispersing into cosmic dust, the galaxy had been forever changed. The Council's supremacy had ended not through conquest, but through the realization that supremacy itself was an illusion. Humanity had proven that advancement came not from perfection, but from the willingness to grow beyond comfortable limitations. In the aftermath, as damage assessments and casualty reports flowed through channels that now included human vessels as equal partners, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood once again in the council chamber. This time, she was not alone. Human representatives stood alongside delegates from every council species, planning for a future none of them could have imagined. The formal vote is a mere formality, Vextar announced, his tone carrying none of its former arrogance. By unanimous consent, humanity is invited to full membership in the Galactic Council with all rights and responsibilities therein. Elena accepted with the simple dignity that had characterized humanity's response throughout the crisis. We are honored to join you as equals. The word equals resonated through the chamber with the force of revelation. For the first time in galactic history, a species had joined the council not as supplicants seeking admission to a superior civilization, but as partners contributing to a community of mutual benefit. As the formal ceremonies concluded and planning began for the massive reconstruction effort required throughout the galaxy, Elena found herself thinking of Ambassador Sarah Chun, the grandmother she had never met who had returned from this same chamber 70 years earlier with nothing but humanity's refusal to surrender their independence. The council had mocked humanity's primitive struggles and offered them chains disguised as gifts. They had expected submission from a species they considered inferior. Instead, humanity had risen in silence, advanced beyond recognition, and returned not as conquerors but as saviors. They had answered mockery with assistance, rejection with rescue, and arrogance with grace. The galaxy would never be the same. And in the vast reaches of human space, new ships were already under construction, vessels designed not for war but for exploration, carrying human crews and council partners toward stars that remained unconquered by any species. Humanity had finally found their place among the stars. It was exactly where they had always belonged, not as subjects or masters, but as equals in the endless adventure of discovery.